Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Eli. I'm a medical student at the University of Iowa, planning on going to orthopedic surgery. Some of you may recognize me from a different video I did on how to get a 250 plus on step 1. Feel free to check that out if you haven't taken step 1 yet. And if you have watched it before, this PowerPoint is going to be a similar representation to what I did in that previous video. So here's my strategy on how to get a 250 plus on step 2 CK. So some of the resources I used are listed below. So Youworld is pretty common resource used amongst everybody. Some maybe less common ones would be like Online MedEd, USMLE Step 2 Secrets, the book, and then Practice Test. Other resources that I know a lot of people use that I didn't use is First Aid. Whereas First Aid for Step 1 was a huge deal and very important to use, First Aid for Step 2 is a little bit different. It's written differently. It's more of a book style rather than high yield bulleted point stuff. Amboss is another thing that a lot of people use that I didn't use, and then I also didn't use anything that I used for step 1. So the first resource I want to talk about is Youworld. So again, the way I did it is a little bit unorthodox from different people that you might have heard ideas from. So what I did is, so my school, University of Iowa, we have a year and a half of preclinicals, and then we start doing our clinicals. So when I first started doing clinicals, I got Youworld for step 2. So what I did was, when I started clinicals based on what rotation I was on, like pediatrics or OBGYN or surgery, I did those when I was studying for that shelf. I did those Youworld questions. So at the beginning of clinicals, I started doing these questions for each rotation. So what I did was, during these times, I would do a set of 40 questions for pediatrics, and then what I did was I used the Youworld function to make flashcards. So for those of you who haven't used Youworld too much, it's pretty easy. After you do a set of 40, it gives you explanations for each one. If you highlight like a sentence, it gives you an option to make a flashcard. So that's what I did. So anytime I had something that I wanted to see over again, I would just highlight that and I would make a flashcard out of that. And so then I would be able to see it later on and refresh my memory. And you can do this. The nice thing is about using the Youworld function rather than, say Anki, is that you can actually use the tables and images in Youworld to actually make the flashcards. So it's really nice. So after doing this for a year and a half throughout clinicals, I did all of them except for the internal medicine questions. So overall, Youworld has about 3,300 questions, and I think I was at about 1,800 by the time I was done with clinicals. So when it comes to actual studying for the step 2, I took a 2-week dedicated period. During that time, during the first week, I completed the remaining questions that I had. So around 1,500 questions I completed in the first week, doing about 120 questions every single day, and then reviewing them that day as well, and then as well as making flashcards. I did not reset my question bank when I started my 2-week dedicated period. I solely trusted the fact that I made flashcards on every question previously, and I only did the new questions and made flashcards for those as well. So overall, I only went through Youworld a single time for the step 2 test. So I used these flashcards that I made. I used them throughout the 2 weeks during my dedicated, and then I actually went through all of them the week prior to the test. So I saw all of the tables, images, content that I wanted to see over again over the last year and a half, and I used them during this study period. And for those of you thinking, I haven't done this, I'm already a year into clinicals, I haven't done these flashcard things, that's completely okay. It's just something that I did. And that I thought of right away. You do not have to do it over a year and a half. You can simply start doing it 6 months ahead of time, 5 months ahead of time, whatever rotation you're on, start doing it. It's never too late to start doing this. So the strategy, I use the same strategy for step 1, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it worked well. And the next source I want to talk about is Online MedEd. So this guy is actually super awesome. He keeps you entertained throughout the entire thing. Throughout the entire lecture. that he gives. I use this for every single shelf, and he helped me tremendously throughout the clinical years. So I watched all the videos, again, during my 1.5 years of clinicals. I watched every video during each subject, or each rotation that I was on. So I finished it by the time dedicated started. During dedicated, I actually watched the videos again, and I didn't watch all of them. I think I made it just over half of them, but I mainly just watched ones that I thought I needed more help with. For like example, psychiatry, I didn't watch those again because I felt pretty comfortable with that, but I did watch surgery again because surgery is kind of a more difficult subject. And during when I was rewatching, I just watched it in 2x speed, so it was a pretty good refresher overall. However, although this is a good source, I would definitely not use this as your only source, because he tends to focus on the high yield. He tends to focus on the high yield stuff rather than, you know, all the nitty gritty stuff that you actually do need to know. Overall, it's about 60 hours worth of videos. If you 2x speed it, breaks it down to 30 hours. If you're taking notes on it, then again, obviously it's going to take a little bit longer. The next source that I use is just a source that I used from, I got off of Reddit, I think. Someone was talking about how they got like a 280 on step 2, and they used this book and it helped them out. So I tried it out, and I actually do agree it helped a lot. So this book, I read it only during dedicated, during my 2 weeks of dedicated. I read about 30 pages a day. Overall, it's about 300 pages long. So over that 2 weeks, it's a pretty doable thing. It's really readable. Like it's easy to read, and it's a relatively small book. It's not like First Aid. It's probably half the size of First Aid. It does a really good job of overviewing all the topics, and there's definitely some high yield information in it. I only use this as a supplement. I didn't use it as a main source whatsoever, but I did use it as a supplement just because, you know, you can only do so many flashcards or questions a day. It's kind of nice just to sit back and kind of read through the book instead. So another big thing is obviously the practice tests. So what I did was I didn't take near as many practice tests as I did for step 2 or step 1. Step 1 I took like 5 practice tests. Step 2 I only took a few practice tests because I felt at that point in medical school you kind of know what the tests are like. You've taken enough practice tests, you've taken step 1, you've done enough practice questions for step 2 and step 1 that you kind of have a pretty good idea of what the test is going to be like. However, there are some things about step 2 that are different from step 1 that are very important to know about before you get into this test. So just to go through it, I only took one NBME for step 2, and that was form 7, and I did that on the very first day of my dedicated, and I did absolutely terrible. I literally did, I think, 30 points worse than I did on that I got on my actual step 1 score. So it kind of freaked me out a little bit, but it just kind of gave me some motivation to study a little bit harder. So after that, I didn't do any more NBME tests. But if you do have time, I would recommend doing another one. I would recommend doing Form 8. From what I did on research, from my research that I looked up on like the internet, Form 8 is pretty good representation. In addition to NBME 7, I did Youworld self-assessment 1 and 2. So both seemed pretty hard when you're doing it. It seems really hard, but I was pretty surprised when I got my score back. And they both actually were pretty good representation of what I actually got on my real test. However, I did a little bit better on my real test than what I got on either of these. So the first one I took a week before the actual test, and the second one I took 3 days prior. And the last test, practice test wise, that I would recommend is the free NBME 120. So you can just Google free NBME 120 step 2 practice questions. I highly recommend this. I think it's 3 blocks of 40 questions. It's free. It's got one thing that's super important, which is abstract examples. So in the practice, it has abstract examples. So this is something different than step 1, where it doesn't have any abstracts. This does have abstracts, and it requires some practice in order to get good at these. Honestly, it brought me back to the MCAT, which brought back nightmares. But when it comes to the actual test, I think for me, I only had 2 abstracts on the actual test. There's 2 abstracts, and there was 3 questions per each abstract. And on the blocks where there were abstracts, there was 2 less questions. So On a normal block, you have 40 questions, but if a block has an abstract in it, it's got 38 questions. So they give you a little bit extra time on the tests, on the sections where there are abstracts. So that's important to know. As well as that, on the free one, they have example of heart and lung sounds. So they have the mannequin picture, and you can move the stethoscope around on the chest and the lungs and the carotids. So that's also a good thing to get used to, and it does a pretty good job of showing how that works as well. So I did the free NBME 2 days before my test, and it gave me a little bit of confidence booster as well, because it was a little bit easier than the NBME 7 form that I did prior. So just as a little reality check, I ended up doing, at the end of the day, I ended up doing 6 points better than I did on step 1, but I 100% did not feel like that when I walked out of the test. In reality, there is a lot of stuff on this test that it's very difficult to study for. You just have to honestly critically think and go with your gut on a lot of these things. You know, the ethics, the behavioral things, the, you know, what's the next best step. A large amount of this test is what's the next best step, and in your mind when you go through these questions, you're like, wow, I feel like all of these could be the next best step. You just kind of have to go with your gut and go with, try to be as least dramatic as possible. Go with, like, you know, giving them fluids, or go with the best next, you know, the most easily done next step. If a 25-year-old female has lower quadrant abdominal pain, get a pregnancy test instead of, you know, doing a CT scan first. So did I feel ready at the end of the day? Absolutely not. But I was really mentally drained just because I was studying so much. I took it relatively soon after step 1, so I really just wanted to be done studying. So I just went for it. I felt way more worried going into this test than I did for step 1, just because I didn't feel as prepared, because I definitely didn't put as much time in it. If you look at it, 2 weeks of dedicated versus 5 weeks of dedicated for step 1, and I walked out honestly feeling even worse. So my tips for you is you just got to go in there feeling confident. After you're done with the question, pretend that you got it right. Just be like, pretend that every question you did, you get right. That's what I did. It kind of helps you stay motivated throughout the test, because it is a 9-hour test, and you need to be able to prepare to focus throughout that. Practice doing the abstracts, because that's one thing that I wasn't used to. And my technique was I saved the abstracts for last, and then I went back for the test and did the abstracts at the very last questions with whatever time I had left, because you'll notice that doing the abstracts, it can suck up a lot of your time. So it's important to have good time management during those sections. And remember, there are 80 fake questions on this test. So if you think you got one wrong, it was probably a fake one, so don't worry about it. So here's some links to the different sources that I used. Youworld, there's the link to order that if you want it. Online MedEd, it's free, don't have to worry about that. There's the link for that. Check it out if you haven't used it. And then the book I used, the USMLE Step 2 Secrets. The link is here. I bought that off of Amazon. I think it was like 25 bucks, so it's not too bad. Thank you guys, appreciate it. I hope you guys do well on this. Please leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. I should get notifications on my computer if there's a comment left. And if you're being really proactive and watching this and you haven't taken step 1 yet, go ahead and check out my other video on how to get a 250 plus or how to pass step 1. Thanks.